You like Mr. Buns and you struggle to sew in a straight line? If so, then I have recorded this video just for you. I've got 4 tips that I was told when I started learning to sew last summer, and they were absolute game changers. So I thought, I'm not going to gatekeep. I'm going to share them with you and hopefully they will help. If you're an experienced sewer, and you're probably a lot more experienced than me, and you've got more tips, please feel free to share them, because I want to share the love on here and just make sewing as easy as possible so that people can enjoy it. Okay, first up, before you even get near the needle, you need to look at where your fabric is. If you're sewing, particularly if you're sewing a lot of fabric and you've got it all here and it's hanging off your table, or even worse, you don't have a table on at all, and you're like this and you're trying to sew in a straight line and you've got all the weight of the fabric down here, you are making it 10 times harder for yourself, because it's going to pull it down and you're constantly going to be fighting and feeling the need to push through. And if it's working properly, you never have to push your fabric through. So the key thing to do, if you have a table, use it. Give yourself enough space so that your fabric and the weight of your fabric can be sitting on the table. So there's nothing pulling that fabric down. And then you can see there, it's almost, I can take my hands off and it's staying into it. So literally all my hands are going to do is guide them through. So before you even start sewing, look at your setup and see if the fabric is falling down in your lap or off the side. And if it is, just change your setup. If it's off the side and it's a really big piece of fabric, put a chair next to you so that it can take the weight. But whatever it is, you want that fabric to be able to sit on its own without you having to maneuver it to keep it in place. That's a really, really amazing top tip that I was taught. So you've got your fabric sorted. The next tip, which is probably the number 1 tip when you're sewing, is never, ever, ever look at the needle. What you want to be looking at is these numbers on your stitch plate. So have a good look at them. And what they are telling you is basically the distance of that line is the distance from the center of the needle. If your needle is lined up in the center, that's what the distance is. So if your pattern says to sew at a 1 centimeter seam allowance, I will look at number 10 and I will line up my fabric with that number 10. I'm not even looking at the needle. And then I put my needle in and I basically start stitching. And what I'm looking at is this. And as long as my fabric stays in line with this number 10, I know that I'm always going to have a straight line. And you'll notice as I'm doing it, I'm not pushing the material. My fingers are literally acting as a guide. You can pretty much stitch on its own. And that's what you get, a completely straight line, because you're following the stitch there. If you're struggling to see these lines, and they can be a little bit challenging, then what you can do is get some masking tape. And you just peel off a piece. And so if we start again with that number 10, so that's 10 millimeters, 1 centimeter, and that 10 millimeters coincides with that line there, and also there's a 10 there. So I can stick this masking tape down along that line and line it all up, make sure it's totally straight, and then I've got a much more obvious line to follow. So if I take my material, I'll just fold it over for this. And basically I line it up, put it in at the beginning, and you can see I've lined it up there, lined it up there. So it's, and my fingers are literally going to guide it through. They're not going to do anything else. They're not going to be pushing. If you need to push, then there's something else going on with your fabric or with your needle choice. But if we just focus today just on a straight line stitch, and as I start sewing, I'll just go nice and slowly, and then you're literally just using your fingers to guide that material, and that's what you get, is just a perfectly straight 1 centimeter seam allowance. If you do use masking tape, I'd suggest that you remove it after each sewing session, otherwise you can leave a nasty sticky residue. That's why we use masking tape rather than sellotape. Some people use magnetic seam guides. It does exactly the same thing, it just helps guide the material. I haven't needed to use one because I found that this was sufficient. If I kept my eyes there and never looked at the needle, I would get a straight line. My last tip, if you have one of these and you've been using it for quilting, it's not just for quilting, it's actually really brilliant for exactly what we're doing here. So creating a really obvious guide like the masking tape did. And these fit on different machines in different ways. Mine literally just slides in the back there, and I use this for quilting, but it can also, as I've done here, just line it up with whichever line you want to be following. So if it was the centimetre one I was just doing, I'd put it there. And so I would put my material in, as we did exactly before. So this could be masking tape, this can be your quilting. This is actually called a seam guide. Put my needle in, and then again, I'm looking at that. And as long as I'm following that all the way through, again, you've got a perfectly straight line. So I hope that has helped. So those 4 top tips: get your fabric on the table so that it's not dragging down and creating more of a problem for you. Don't look at the needle. Have a look at that stitch plate and see which line you're wanting to follow in terms of your seam allowance. And then if you're really struggling, use masking tape, or if you've got one of those stitch guides or quilting things, pop it into your machine and use that. And hopefully, if you follow that and you take your time and just relax, then you will sew a straight line.